It's 3 minutes after 10, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we begin inevitably with events on the other side of the Atlantic, and of course, where the ripples from that rather large rock may end. We will turn our attention a little later in the programme to... I want to have a look at the Brexit shenanigans, what is or is not likely to happen next. Frankly, your guess is now as good as mine. I think I know roughly what the plan was, but I don't think that plan can be what the plan is as a result of what happened at the weekend. And if you are a NHS worker, first of all, thank you and good luck. Second of all, give me a ring if you get the chance a little later in today's programme, because I just want to know how you're doing. I want to find how you're fixed, what you feel, what you think about where we are now in regard to the biggest medical catastrophe stroke emergency of our lives. It just struck me, it was the Daily Mirror, actually, a newspaper that I don't pay as much attention to as perhaps I should. I guess partly as a result of what we've been enduring for the last 4 years. I turn first to the newspapers that tell me what the enemy is thinking, so to speak, as opposed to what the other side are thinking. But the Mirror really nails the front page today. It says, "We are all burnt out. Exhausted NHS staff could quit in droves unless they get a pay boost now," unions warn. Even with a pay boost, I suspect many will be feeling near the end of their tether. And it is to you I would like to talk later in the programme today, because I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that, moving though it was, the sight of millions and millions of your fellow countrymen and women clapping on their doorsteps in admiration and gratitude for what you've done doesn't put food on the table, or indeed pay the bills, or perhaps make much sense in the context of all the effort now being put into persuading you that the virus isn't a big enough deal for a lockdown after all. But that's all on the agenda. What was your moment this weekend? I appreciate sometimes I have to guard against thinking that everybody else is, I was about to say, obsessed with or interested in the news as I am. I don't know, to be honest, what I'd be like if I didn't do this for a living. Would I be mainlining CNN? And I'm not as bad as some people I know for just not being able to turn away from it. I did have CNN on at the crucial moment, and it was quite remarkable. And it was remarkable for me for this reason. I hadn't felt the gravity of the situation. I hadn't registered, perhaps because I do this for a living. You know, I've got to talk every day. I've got to say something. Silence is not an option. Keith is nodding. No, regretfully, I think I could say. Keith is nodding regretfully. Silence is not an option. But I don't think I'd realised how high the stakes were. There's a guard, isn't there, against hyperbole. But as you recognised what Trump was, you realised just how high the stakes had been. I reached for the F word quite early in proceedings, because a lot of what Trump did and certainly said as a candidate was fascistic. And we saw fairly quickly, particularly after he sought to defend neo-Nazis at Charlottesville, and subsequently the white supremacism grew and grew and grew. You, as a white person who hates that kind of thing, and I do fully appreciate there are lots of white people who love it. There aren't 70 million of them, but there are millions and millions of Americans who've watched what unfolded over the last 4 years, culminating in hundreds of thousands of deaths, many directly as a result of his incompetence and dishonesty, and liked what they saw and went back with it. So I think that's probably why the euphoria would be entirely the wrong word to describe what anti-racists or liberals, or whatever word you want to use, feel today. Haven't heard much attempts to both sides it yet. You presume, I saw one attempt last week to say, I can't believe that Remainers are complaining about Trump lying about the vote. That's what they spent the last 4 years doing. You sort of look at those comments, you sort of think, hang on a minute. I got the idea for a second referendum from Jacob Rees-Mogg. Since when was he a Remainer? Where was it the idea that you have a vote once the deal has been defined to decide whether actually you want to press ahead with it? Seemed to me to be eminently sensible. Still does, although of course that ship has sailed. So you will get the contortions and the lies from people who will probably preface what they say by claiming not to be an admirer of Donald Trump, but, always big buts, on the horizon when you hear phrases like, I'm not a racist, but I'm not a Donald Trump fan, but I'm not a massive bigot, but. And the scale of the stakes was brought home to me by one of the commentators on CNN, a gentleman called Van Jones, who I knew a little of before, but not a lot. And there was a rawness to his emotion, and it's his words, of course, that convey the most meaning. But there was a rawness to his emotion it took me about an hour to work out why I found it so disturbing. It actually shook me inside. It churned me up, and I couldn't work out why. And I think it was because even people who are not comfortable with, tiny babies and children being separated from their parents and locked up, for over 500 of whom still don't know where their parents are. Nobody knows where their parents are at the moment. People who aren't comfortable with the leader of the so-called free world hanging out with, white supremacist is a euphemism, isn't it? Hanging out effectively with neo-Nazis. Giving interviews to journalists who claim that the Sandy Hook parents are hoaxers. I mean, the madness of it will take a generation properly to settle. It's not over, of course. The fact that 70 million Americans could vote for him now makes it more plausible than it has ever been in my life that we could see a lurch ever downwards in our lifetimes. But for now, it's a sigh of relief. For me, but not for Van Jones. For Van Jones, something altogether more profound and important happened. And I want you to listen to this because it's so important. And it brings home what was at stake in that election, which perhaps many of us knew deep down, but didn't like to look at it because it was so scary. I hope that's not cowardice or ducking responsibility. I'm fairly confident that most of us have done our duty in resisting the rise of the far right, but we're far from victorious. And when you hear this, and you think of people in the British media or the British political establishment who were and still will cheerleading for Trump, there's a ridiculous MP called Andrea Jenkins. I don't know if you've come across her, but she was tweeting her support for Donald Trump as recently as 3 weeks ago. And this is why his defeat is in some ways more important than Joe Biden's victory.
Well, it's easier to be a parent this morning. It's easier to be a dad. It's easier to tell your kids character matters. It matters. Tell them the truth matters. Being a good person matters. And it's easier for a whole lot of people. If you're Muslim in this country, you don't have to worry if the president doesn't want you here. If you're an immigrant, you don't have to worry if the president's going to be happier to have babies snatched away or send dreamers back for no reason. It's a vindication for a lot of people who have really suffered. The I can't breathe. That wasn't just George Floyd. There was a lot of people that felt that they couldn't breathe. Every day you're waking up and you're getting these tweets and you just don't know. And you're going to the store and people who have been afraid to show their racism are getting nastier and nastier to you. And you're worried about your kids and you're worried about your sister. And can she just go to Walmart and get back into her car without somebody saying something to her? And you spent so much of your life energy just trying to hold it together. And this is a big deal for us just to be able to get some peace and have a chance for a reset. And the character of the country matters. And being a good man matters. I just want my sons to look at this. Look at this. It's easy to do it the cheap way and get away with stuff, but it comes back around. It comes back around. And this is a good day for this country. I'm sorry for the people who lost. For them, it's not a good day. But for a whole lot of people, it's a good day.
And it took me a while to work out why that was so powerful. I mean, partly it was the visceral emotion that Van Jones displayed on the screen. We're not used to seeing that on our televisions, and understandably, because we rarely endure or encounter such profound moments in history. And do you know, I won't play it to you again because it's quite long, but he didn't mention himself once. He didn't mention himself. All of his concern was for others. Admittedly, his family members, in the case of his sons, who no longer have to be taught that cheats don't usually prosper. They might have prospered for the last 4 years, but they don't usually prosper. And of course, his sister, who, as he quite rightly pointed out, is considerably more likely to be exposed to public expressions of racial hatred than she would have been when Barack Obama was president. And then the Dreamers, and then the children taken from their parents, and the parents deprived of their children, Muslims, all of these people, none of them were him. And yet you flip it on its head and imagine what people from the other side of the fence would have been saying. It's highly unlikely they'd have been expressing empathy, compassion and concern for complete strangers that they'd never met. That seems to me to be a crucial divide, a crucial distinction, and I don't know how you build it. Sadly, you don't build it by doing what he did at the end, which was expressing sympathy and concern for the other lot, because moments later CNN flipped to a Republican commentator who started worrying about hate speech laws and a lockdown. I mean, quite incredible, really, to think that those were seen as balance, but they are. And I don't know if you've seen the clip of Joe Biden saying, "I'm Irish," just to sort of a statement of ancestral fact. But of course, and I wish that racism would retreat as fast as Donald Trump's dignity did this weekend. But of course, if you are a racist, you will now be using a little clip of Joe Biden saying, "I'm Irish," to claim that he hates the English. What possible grounds is that? My name is O'Brien. I must hate all English people. It's just nuts, right? But how many times have we said this? You cannot see the world except through the lens of your own prejudices. So if you're a massive racist, you think Joe Biden is as well. If you're disgraceful, you think that Kamala Harris is as well. If you are a despicable, hate-filled fraud, then you think everybody else is as well. And that's how you end up really waving goodbye to your presidency in the parking lot of a garden centre wedged between a sex shop and a crematorium, which was the other big moment of the weekend, up there with Van Jones. They thought they'd booked the Four Seasons Hotel. They accidentally booked the Four Seasons landscaping business. And the person I would most like to speak to on the programme today is the person that took the call from Rudy Giuliani's people and didn't set them straight on the fact that they'd phoned a landscaping gardener rather than a prestigious five-star hotel. I normally set my bar quite high on the programme. I don't expect to get that call today. 15 minutes after 10 is the time. 0345 60 60 973 is the number that you need today. I am confident that Joe Biden will be good for Britain because he cares about things like the rule of law, peace, international cooperation, community, and people other than himself, all of which make him the polar opposite of his predecessor in the White House. But I could be wrong. I often am. It's something that Donald Trump is incapable of acknowledging or admitting. It's important, it's human. But I can't quite see how anybody could be anything but warm towards the prospect of a Biden presidency, except people whose life has been defined for the last 4 years by causing pain and discomfort to others, except that world view best summed up by the famous or infamous caller to this programme last year who said, "I know he's a racist liar, but I love it because it upsets people like you and Sadiq Khan." And the question is, where does that go now? Because you won't hear any, or certainly not many people who perhaps share my worldview or parts of my worldview. We don't come on the radio today and start shouting about loving the taste of racist tears or whatever it is that you are supposed to do in this circumstances. You lost, get over it. You heard Van Jones at the end there saying, expressing sympathy for people who'd lost. The opposite emotional and psychological position to saying, I know he's a racist liar, but I love it because it upsets people like you and Sadiq Khan. I should probably move on from that caller, but it haunts me because it sums up everything so perfectly, and it was so rare to encounter someone so honest about their what would you call it? I don't know. A position, to be fair, their opinion. Madness. Oh, feast on those. How does it work, guys? You're going to have to help me out here. How do you do? I mean, how is this about delight in your discomfort and pain? Oh, you've got to love it. You've got to drink those racist tears. It just feels tragic and heartbreaking on every level to think that people, after 4 years of what we've all seen and witnessed, could have actually liked it. 70 million people. So Biden and Britain. 18 after 10 is the time. What do you think? 0345 60 60973. Peace, international cooperation, the rule of law, kindness, and I appreciate not everybody would like this, but also Christianity, as in relatively low-church Catholicism, not as in the kind of Christianity that I will remind you of in a moment from a Donald Trump fan. It's 10:18. 22 minutes after 10 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We'll do that one day, actually. We'll try and dig into the psychology. Now that, temporarily perhaps, but for at least 4 years, the likelihood of seeing this kind of poison swamp America has receded. I would love to talk to you about what goes on in your head when you derive your only real pleasure from pain caused to other people. Now, I would use that not just to describe the a kind of mindset that we referred to a moment ago, but also to describe Donald Trump's entire life. Did you ever see him laugh? Did you ever see him laugh? Can you remember him laughing? Or even smiling in a sort of sincere and human way rather than in a kind of forced rictus way? The only time he ever really seemed enthusiastic about life was when he was being gross about other human beings, whether it was disabled journalists or dead war heroes. Quite incredible to think that captured the imagination of 70 million people. So if you were tuning in today expecting me to, I can't even say it with a straight face, to be drinking racist tears, then no way. When it looked like Trump might have pulled it off, I said to you, this is, in a way, it's liberating, because you know now how big this is, but it's also strangely depressing. So your thoughts, your feelings. I think Biden has to be good for Britain, but I think that the rule of law is good for Britain, and we currently have a government that doesn't. I think that international cooperation is good for Britain, and we currently have a government that doesn't. I think that feeding hungry children in the holidays is good for Britain, and we currently have a government that... Oh, no, hang on. It doesn't. We'll have to check with Marcus Rashford what the current state of play is. And that is weird. That's why Brexit, Biden, Britain all seem to me today to be in a bit of a cement mixer. Eloise is in Camden. Eloise, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi. Sorry, I'm very nervous.
It's only me.
No, I think potentially, and obviously, there's questions around Biden. We'll have to see. But yes. As opposed to Trump, I think it can only be good for Britain. But by that I mean the people of Britain. I don't mean our current government.
Yes.
Because Trump was prepared to, he didn't care about us breaking international law, breaking our word, doing this, that, the other. I
don't think he cares about anything, does he?
Exactly.
Except himself. So, that's why I find that it might be a little bit anecdotal, Eloise, but the fact I can never remember him laughing or looking you and I would call simply happy. It's quite bizarre. I'm actually quite
glad I never saw him laughing, because you'd think it would look like a portal to hell, but that's just my view.
It's a bit strong. Carry on.
I know, sorry.
And then you have this problem with Ireland, which, as ever, it was 2016 or 17 when we said it's all going to stand or fall on what happens in Ireland, and people were poo-pooing us and telling us we were wrong, and here we are now. I mean, that is absolutely huge, isn't it?
It is. I mean, and this is why I think Biden can potentially be good for Britain, even if we don't get a trade deal, which I know will leave us stuck in lots of ways.
The thing is, he doesn't derive pleasure or political support from hurting people, which all Trump ever did, and that great caller from last year distilled it down to perfection. I love it because it upsets people like you. Biden doesn't set out, so he wouldn't be He'll do what's best for America, but also what's best for the world and what's best for the world order and international relations. He's not going to do something stupid like refuse ever to criticise Vladimir Putin, claim he's fallen in love with Kim Jong-un, and then want Nigel flipping Farage to be the British ambassador to America. Everything is ego with Trump, and Biden, he must have an ego, but it doesn't seem to have played a very big part in his political journey.
Well, this is the thing, and I think, personally, this is why I think it could potentially be good for Britain. And when I say Britain, I mean the people of Britain, not our current government, because he could potentially turn around, as he's already started to do a little bit, and go, right, if you want a trade deal with us or deal with us in any way in the future, you need to abide by international law. You have to have certain things in place in your country. I mean, not saying America is perfect by any stretch, but, it's going to be that,
it's the Good Friday
Agreement. You've got to stop breaking the law.
It's the Good Friday Agreement. It is very, very simply. He understands it. He gets it. He has Irish heritage. So even if he was, not that clued into it, he would understand the depth of emotion and the historical importance of the Good Friday Agreement. But clearly, that is the reality check that this government was praying it wouldn't have to go through. The British government was praying it wouldn't have to go through until when? I don't know. Kicking it down the road without knowing exactly where the road might lead. Eloise, a sparkling debut. I look forward to your second call to the programme. Edward's in Roscommon in Ireland. Edward, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say, James, that if you're expecting all peace and love from Biden, you're going to be sorely mistaken. This man has never met a war he didn't like. Iraq, Yemen, Libya. I mean, this guy is a complete and utter warmonger.
I don't think he's going to declare war on Britain, though, is he?
Oh, of course not. No. That's the hallmarks of a bully. He won't declare war on anybody with nuclear submarines. Don't worry about that.
Right. So, I mean, good or bad for Britain? I mean, I appreciate that the conflicts you mention are...
Yeah, he's good for the ruling classes everywhere.
Okay.
The wealthy, the well-connected, of course he's good for that.
Right.
But, I'm just saying...
yes, go on.
Liberal people...
what does that mean? What does liberal mean?
Are really going to be disappointed, James, that's all.
What does liberal mean? Because it's a word I hear a lot. What do you mean by it?
I mean, what I mean by liberal is somebody that allows other people to express their points of view. I don't think, Google is liberal. That just closes down any story that might be negative.
I didn't really ask what you thought about Google.
The whole media was against Trump, and I'm not a Trump supporter.
No, but you don't. What's a liberal again? What's a liberal again?
When I said liberals, I meant kind of neoliberals. You know what I mean?
No idea. That doesn't. So you didn't mean liberal when you said liberal. You meant a different kind of liberal from the liberal that you didn't mean when you said liberal. Well, just give me either kind. What did you mean when you said liberals aren't going to be happy with Biden?
Okay, when I said that, I meant genuine liberals, So
you didn't mean neoliberals?
No.
Well, because a minute ago you said you did mean... A minute ago you said when you said liberal you meant neoliberal, and now you're saying you didn't mean neoliberal.
Yeah, well, first time on radio, you know... That's
all right, I don't, but it's a word it's a word we hear a lot, isn't it, liberal?
Yeah.
But what does it mean?
Liberal, I think, is a good thing, you know what I mean? It's obviously good,
but also bad.
Neoliberal, when I say use neoliberal, it's an awful thing like Tony Blair and co, you know. So.
Right, yeah, okay. So that would be the ruling class?
Yeah.
Yeah. Have a great day, Edward.
Okay, thank you.
10:34, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We will catch up with the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, shortly. His reaction to the American election result, although, of course, in Donald Trump's world, it's not actually a result yet. I'm not quite sure what it is, but we shall find out in the coming weeks. I wonder if he'll be done for trespassing eventually, in the way that Al Capone was done for tax evasion. If he refuses to leave the White House, he could presumably just be done for trespassing at some point. I don't know how the law reaches into those sort of quarters, but I'm interested in your thoughts about the American election result, and we'll continue that conversation shortly. First, though, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is on the line. Have you offered your congratulations to Joe Biden yet, or are you waiting for all the... I can't keep up. I don't know if we're supposed to stop counting or carry on counting. It seems to depend on where you were in America last week, Sadiq Khan.
Well, I've got a smile on my face, a spring in my footstep today as I came to work, and I just feel a bit lighter than I did this time last week. But I tell you this, when I did lots of sports when I was younger, and one of the things my teachers and my coaches taught me was to be magnanimous in victory and be dignified in defeat. And it's a lesson I've taken with me when I was a lawyer and also a politician. And I just say this to anybody who's thinking about doing sports or in any profession where you can lose or win. It demonstrates one's class by how you accept defeat when you do defeat, because part of life is accepted sometimes you can't win. And I'm hoping that those around Donald Trump, those in the Republican Party, the GOP, the men in grey suits, they tend to be men, speak to President Trump and explain to him that now that all the votes have been counted, there is a winner, and it isn't Trump.
He did, of course, attack you personally, didn't he? And in circumstances that it's hard to imagine any other American president, future, past or present, ever doing. How did that how did you receive that? It was an astonishingly ugly spotlight to be put under.
I mean, when I said to you a moment ago, and I was being half serious, that I feel lighter today, it's because I don't think your listeners who aren't Muslim realise this, but look, being a Muslim ain't easy. It just isn't easy. And it's never been more hard to be a Muslim than the last 4 years. Why do I say that? Because you had, for the first time, the leader of the free world, the most powerful man in the world, a mainstream politician, perpetuating a view that Islam and the West are incompatible, perpetuating a view that all of us must be bad or must be terrorists because of the actions of a very small minority. And let's be frank, the reason why I was singled out was not because of any other reason, in my view, and the view of experts, than my faith. And the problem with that is it brought into the mainstream those who are on the periphery, and it led to Muslims around the world carrying an additional weight placed upon our shoulders by Donald Trump. And so many of us around the world, not just Londoners, but people across the world who weren't happy that the president of the USA had the sort of values and beliefs he had. By the way, it wasn't just Muslims, it was those of Mexican origin, it was women, it was those from the LGBTQ plus community, and many others. And I think many of us around the world are celebrating the success of Biden and Harris's campaign, but also hopefully it'll lead to people realizing that actually there is genuinely, I don't want to sound trite, but far more that unites us than divides us. And
yet 70 plus million people watched what unfolded over the last 4 years and voted for him, including quite an uptick in one of the constituencies you just mentioned. The LGBT community voted for him in greater numbers than they did in 2016.
Well, I think we've all got to remember, those of us who are progressives, who believe in pluralism, that actually although Trump may have been defeated, the views he espouses and the factors he plays on haven't. In my view, there are two types of politicians. There are those who play on people's fears and those that address them. There are still, I'm afraid, people who play on people's fears. And that's why it's really important for the party that I belong to in this country, the National Labour Party, to learn the right lessons from the Biden and Harris victory. That means, James, us not simply talking to people who already vote Labour, right? We've got to speak to those who can't find it in themselves to vote Labour, those that vote Conservative or Lib Dem or Green or stay at home, and explain to them why they should lend us their vote, whether it comes to mayoral elections or general elections. And I think it's really important for us to realise the importance of building coalitions, as Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have done.
And yet you are not in any mood to build much of a coalition with the current government, except perhaps in some areas of lockdown. Where do you stand at the moment? I know that you've moved position as more science has emerged. Things like the face masks you were ahead of the curve on, the 10 p.m. curfew, which you explained to me. I couldn't see the wisdom of it. You explained the hope. The hope hasn't been realised. Keir Starmer appeared to be stepping away from that when we come out of this lockdown. I mean, what do you think is going to happen come December the 2nd?
Well, the first thing is, just to share with LBC listeners, is what we're seeing in London is a stabilisation of the increase in the rate, and the increase in the virus is not going as fast as it was prior to the Tier 2 restrictions coming into play, it takes about 3 weeks to see an impact on any restrictions and a further 3 weeks on the hospital numbers. And the good news is the pace of increases slowed down. And so I'm hopeful by December the 2nd we'll have made sufficient progress. The key thing, though, is not to have a slowdown in the spread of the virus, but the R number, the reproduction number, to be below 1. Because if it's below 1, it means the virus isn't spreading. The key thing, though, the government doesn't appear to understand is that the health and the economy are intrinsically linked. And so they've got to realise that acting slow with the health consequences and impact on the economy, and the worst thing for the economy is not to get a grip on the virus. And the best way in the absence of a vaccine to get a grip on the virus is a fully functioning test, trace, isolate system. And the problem with the 10 p.m. curfew was once it came into being, it was clear that actually the intention wasn't being realised in practice. And that's why we've got to be nimble and move and not be, ideologically, stuck to a particular policy.
Speaking of being nimble and moving, presumably you applaud the government's decision to buckle and go along with Marcus Rashford for the second time in 3 months.
It brings a smile to my face when I see this 23-year-old Man United player having the influence he's having, and it pains me as a Liverpool fan saying something nice about a Man United player, but this guy's been amazing.
No, it doesn't. Stop being silly.
It really does. I mean, he scores a hat-trick midweek.
That was a bit special, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then he gets a U-turn from the Prime Minister. It's disappointing that in the meantime, though, James, and I speak as a child who used to be in the free school meals, really? The anxiety that parents would have gone through during half-term and the up to Christmas, it's really stressful. It's really stressful. And I just think, why? Why not just see the evidence and actually realise that the cost isn't humongous and do the right thing? I'm pleased the government's done a U-turn. I think changing your mind when the evidence changes is a sign of strength, not a weakness. And I'm pleased that the Prime Minister's done so. And I'm pleased that Marcus Rashford has got another win over the government. I'm hoping that Marcus Rashford can now be a full-time footballer rather than being a campaigner.
It'd be interesting to see changing your mind when the evidence changes. Sounds like an advert for a recently published book. Before you go, Sadiq Khan, this will sound like a mischievous question, because it is. But if you go out around the country defending your party leader's line on something, in some cases inviting quite a lot of criticism and abuse for doing so, as many Conservative MPs did over the last few weeks, and then your party leadership completely reverses that policy, where does it leave you as a politician, as a constituency politician, having been cheerleading for something that your leader then abandons after, in some cases, you've endured a torrent of, whether you consider it justified or not, it's real, it's abusive, and it's serious. It's an astonishing state of affairs that seems to be happening all the time.
I think Boris Johnson as a Prime Minister has been found out over the last few months. I used to be a whip in the Labour government, and the moment MPs think that a Prime Minister will, bend according to the latest poll, or will do a U-turn just because it's the popular thing to do in the short term, and it hasn't got the right set of values or the right set of policies, the right sort of team around him, it means they're no longer confident to go out and bat for you. And that's why it's really important to have strong leadership in a time of crisis in particular, but for the team to know they can have confidence in their leader. What I'm seeing in the Conservative Party in Parliament, but also when I listen to MPs and even ministers in the media, is the beginning of the end of them having confidence in Boris Johnson as their leader and their Prime Minister. And that's why you'll be seeing over the course of the next few weeks and months, I predict, other runners and riders doing more and more media to raise their profiles, because I think the race has begun for the leadership of the Conservative Party after Boris Johnson.
Well, rumours rife that there may be some sort of pivot come next summer. Finally, back to Biden and the question of Boris Johnson's potential relationship with the American president. One of Obama's key advisors described him as a shape-shifting creep on social media at the weekend, and a lot of people have been reminded of the comments Johnson made about Barack Obama's Kenyan heritage, meaning somehow that he has a historical antipathy towards the English. Ben Rhodes, another advisor's book, describes the moment Obama was told about that on Air Force One. And, so the black guy doesn't like the English. And it was suggested that British racism was just a little more hidden than American racism. And Obama basically demurred. So he considers himself to have been a victim of a racist jibe from Boris Johnson, and he is, of course, on the record as describing Joe Biden as a brother, never mind a very close friend and former colleague. It's not great, that, is it?
Well, I spent a lot of time over the last 4 years, in particular, speaking to colleagues in the DNC. That's the Democratic Party in America that does lots of the work in election times, but also in between elections. And the thing is, they read our newspapers, they read our articles, they know what's happening here, and they know who runners and riders are. And let me be frank, Joe Biden's team know exactly what Boris Johnson has said in the past, and they know what sort of Prime Minister Boris Johnson is.
But he's not the type to bear grudges. He wouldn't be petty, would he, like his predecessor?
It's not a question of bearing a grudge. It's actually being concerned about some of the things that America's closest ally is saying. And this week of all weeks, it's really important because today in the House of Lords, there is a vote on the internal markets bill. And the clause in the bill that causes particular issues is one that, firstly, basically breaches international law, because it says even though we reached an agreement with the EU, we're going to discard that. But secondly, it risks the Good Friday Agreement. And so it's not an issue of bearing a grudge in relation to a racist comment made by Boris Johnson. It's actually being concerned about the consequences of some of the Prime Minister's policies. And so if the Prime Minister's got any sense, I think he will do another U-turn in relation to the internal markets bill. And if the House of Lords defeats it today, he will decide to not bring it back to the Commons for them to overturn the House of Lords' defeat today.
Watch this space. Sadiq Khan, many thanks. A little longer than we had previously agreed, but I guess once you're on live, there's not a lot you can do about it. It is 10:46. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Joe Biden is the president-elect of the United States of America, and it's odd, and it's weird, and it's strangely not anticlimactic. That wouldn't be the right phrase, but given that so much has been defined by Donald Trump for the last 4 years, people either opposed to his programme and his perceived fascism, or people either delighted by it, largely because it upsets the other lot so much. It's almost like we need to turn the whole thing off and turn it on again, I think. But I will continue to take your calls before I turn it off. 10:51, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Just sort of chatting about Joe Biden. A few of you, not cross with me, pointing out that as a straight white man, possibly my lack of euphoria is not representative of how you feel at the moment. I thought Sadiq Khan actually implicitly made that point rather well, singled out by the American president for particularly toxic abuse simply by dint, of course, of his religion. It's always, I'm always amused, as you know, by the argument that Muslims should integrate more. And then when you become mayor of the capital city of a country, it turns out that the people who said Muslims should integrate more are even more angry with you than they were when they were accusing you of not integrating enough. But hey-ho, logic's never been the strong suit of these kind of people, and there are millions of them. That's why I don't know what healing means. Neither are we on air in America. Well, I suppose we are technically on air in America, in the spirit of the government counting PPE or testing capacity. We are technically, you can, every ear in the world can hear us. Twice, of course, if you count the other ear. But we're not an American radio station, so I don't know how qualified we are together to comment on the question of how plausible it is for America to heal. You know, you see already attempts by one of Trump's ludicrous children to sort of compare the response to the killing of George Floyd by police officers to Republicans not yet rioting about the result of an election. Like losing an election is, in some sense, a comparable injustice and a comparable crime to being killed by police. Anyway, like I said, logic is not the strong suit at the moment. I don't know, is the short answer, how likely it is that Biden can heal America. But I do believe he'll be better for Britain simply by dint of caring about things like peace, prosperity and international law. Although, as our caller from Ireland pointed out earlier, before tripping himself up a little bit, as many people do at the moment, on words that are thrown out without anybody ever stopping to wonder what they actually mean, in this case the word liberal. I recommend Ian Dunt's book, How to Be a Liberal, as highly as I've ever recommended any book to you in my life to help you avoid tiger traps like the one that old Edward fell into. But the Britain's health and future has always been enhanced by having clear leadership in America. And America's role as a world leader was something Trump felt very uncomfortable with, presumably because Putin told him not to do various things in various theatres, cozying up to Kim Jong-un, criticising Sadiq Khan, but never criticising Vladimir Putin. These are the stuff. This is the stuff of future history books. But where are you today? 0345 6060 973. Either just sort of straight responses to the events of the weekend, or, of course, you can have a crack, because I can't at the moment, at the plausibility of America healing. How deep do these wounds go? Everything's changed for me in the way that I look at the world and in the way that I look at my sort of fellow humans. I've told you a million times that I kind of grew up thinking that the Holocaust and that Nazism, even after events in Yugoslavia, I kind of found myself thinking that was sort of alien to my culture, alien to my background, to my place in history. And now I know that it could be around the corner, almost anywhere. And that's something I don't think that ever changes now. Once you recognise that the likelihood of these toxic movements rising in your own period, your own era, even your own country, if it can happen in America, it can happen here. So Sadiq Khan might have a lighter step today, and I understand why, and in many ways I do. But it feels like one of those moments that changes the way you look at the world forever. And that's as we celebrate his departure, although he's not quite ready to contemplate that himself yet. James is in Sherborne, in Dorset. James, what would you like to say?
I just think it's got to be a good thing for Britain, just because it's going to be a good thing for the world, getting rid of the orange-faced buffoon that's been in the White House for the last 4 years.
It's funny, isn't it, how clearly that seems to you to be true, and of course to me, and yet, 70 million odd Americans still voted for him, and there's plenty of people in this country who like the cut of his jib.
Yeah, but I think there is a caveat to that,
yes.
in that, Biden is absolutely right in saying if we break the Good Friday Agreement, not all bets are off, but it's going to be much harder. And I'm an ex-veteran, 4 tours in Northern Ireland.
You can't be an ex-veteran.
You know what I mean. I'm an
oh, God, I'm so annoying. I don't know why anybody ever rings me. It's just unbearable.
Listen, I'm an ex-soldier. Veteran's an American word anyway. I'm an ex-soldier,
yes.
And I am passionate about the Good Friday Agreement.
Well, you understand it. Biden understands it.
I walk the streets in Derry and in Belfast, and I know what it's like.
Indeed, you do. And he seems to understand the importance of it.
Yeah.
I was toying just a bit early in the week for this. We wait and see how some of the dust settles. And technically, I suppose, James, if you rejoined the army, you'd be an ex-veteran. So you should have given me a slap there.
No.
What do you think the plan was? Because the more I look at it, especially the bill that's in the Lords today and Article 10 of the withdrawal agreement, the more I look at it, I think it was Article 10, forgive me if it wasn't, I think that the plan was either there was no plan, it was just, as usual, postponement and can-kicking, or they were hoping events would reach a point where the European Union, in order to uphold the integrity of the single market, the European Union would have to be the ones to put some sort of customs border on the island of Ireland. And although the UK government had rendered that position arguably inevitable, the plan would be to rely upon the supine British newspapers to portray it as some sort of offence committed by the EU. That's all I got in terms of things that could fit all of the observable facts. I don't know if you've gone that far down your ruminations.
I mean, I just think that, Johnson had speculated to the Northern Irish about how it was all going to be fine. He then realised that he couldn't deliver what he'd said, yes. And therefore he had to do yet another U-turn. But
where the next U-turn would have been, we will now never know, because I think Biden will sort of hold feet to the fire. James, thank you, and forgive me in advance for stealing the word spaffulated off you. I think it's an improvement even on bloviated, not least because it's not actually a real word yet, I don't think. So we'll go for that all day long. Peter is in Oxford. Peter, I don't have long, I do apologise, but make the most of the 2 minutes you have.
Okay, James, hi again.
Yeah.
I'm a doctor from Ireland. I think both of those issues are really on the table at the moment. Irish question, we've heard so much about that already, and Sadiq Khan spoke very well about the internal markets bill. Hopefully it's dead, but we don't know for sure yet. I think it is very much America's business. When people are going to say to you, the Americans are sticking their nose into British affairs again. Well, no, the internal markets bill threatens seriously an international agreement. And it threatens the Good Friday Agreement, where the Americans have a major part in setting it up. And Biden knows what he's talking about. He's been deeply involved in Irish politics as chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He's somebody who believes in evidence. He believes in actually looking in detail at the facts.
He seems
to. He's talking about.
What about the allegation from your fellow Irishman a little earlier? Not allegation, description of someone who seems comfortable waging foreign wars, or certainly did as vice president. It's a fly in the ointment, isn't it?
Well, I mean, that's not something I can really comment on. I think what you need to be able to do is look at the international picture and make the best case judgment at the time. And I think, whatever else you can say about Biden, for sure he's going to look at both sides. He's not going to make decisions about war and peace based on prejudice, which is what basically Trump has been doing.
And self-interest, prejudice and self-interest. And presumably sometimes his horoscope, you just got the impression he'd woken up in a certain mood and was poised to make far-reaching decisions based on that. Peter, you came in on time, and I think you were speaking a little quicker than usual, so credit to you for managing to to get all the words into the available space. I have a crack at explaining what I think is going to happen next with regard to Northern Ireland, or what I think is going on after this. I'm going to try and explain it to you. Don't laugh, all right? And I can't stop you throwing rotten tomatoes at me, metaphorically speaking, but this is why this week is so important. And I won't give you the sort of the numbers and the brackets, the stuff in parentheses, but I will give you the broad brushstrokes. So what the withdrawal agreement meant was that it would be impossible for Northern Ireland not to remain in the regulatory regime of the customs union / single market. And I still get a little bit confused about in what contexts those two phrases fit perfectly. So I'll use them in conjunction with each other when I should probably only be using one of them, just for clarity, for the avoidance of doubt. Okay, so you had that. That was the deal, because otherwise you'd need a border in Ireland, and having infrastructure at the border in Ireland would break the spirit or the intention or the obvious purpose of the Good Friday Agreement, which is a notoriously vague document, but nobody, I think, disputes the fact that it would be broken by physical infrastructure on the border in Ireland. Okay, and also, and perhaps for me, the phrase regulatory alignment was always a lot bigger than people seem to twig at the time. You can't have something that costs less on one side of that border, whether it's physical or not, than it does on the other. That would also defy the Good Friday Agreement. So the withdrawal agreement, and I don't know, and this is going to sound incredible given the tone of the campaign in the general election in December and the phrase oven-ready deal and the slogan get Brexit done, I'm not sure that they knew what they were signing up for. And if they did, they must have known all along that they were going to have to break it subsequently. And these are the moments I get most exercised by. Thank you for indulging me, by the way. I don't know what I'd do if I couldn't offload on you every day. But these are the moments I struggle with the most, is what were they thinking? Were they thinking, sod the British public, we'll get them to vote for us, hopefully get a massive majority, and then we'll tear up the withdrawal agreement that we've just kind of told them is an oven-ready deal? The contempt with which they treat the British public is big enough now for me to countenance that possibility. I must say that Lionel Barber's new book, the former editor of the Financial Times, is brilliant on some of the interplay between government and public, and what people like Dominic Cummings would say to someone like him in private compared to what we were being told in public. I really recommend that book as well as Dante's. I haven't recommended my own yet today, so just start the clock, Keith, will you? And that either they didn't realise what they were signing up for, or they knew that they were going to have to resile from it at some point subsequently, because, and this is where things get a little bit murky, but I'm going to talk to Pete Foster of the Financial Times in half an hour, so this is like an aperitif or an amateur hour. We'll go pro-am. I'll be the amateur, Pete will be the pro. So here's my understanding of it is that if you wanted to introduce something in Great Britain, which is the United Kingdom minus Northern Ireland for the purposes of this analysis, if you wanted to introduce something in Great Britain in the context of state aid or subsidies, right, that would automatically apply to Northern Ireland. And if it did automatically apply to Northern Ireland, then you wouldn't have regulatory alignment on the island of Ireland, because it couldn't automatically apply to the Republic of Ireland. So you would need, under what I think, and don't sue me, was Article 10 of the withdrawal agreement, Yeah, I am doing all this off the top of my head, so I reserve the right to rewind and erase all of it. I think it was Article 10 of the withdrawal agreement, but that's a detail. What I think it would mean is that we would need permission from the European Union to introduce nationwide subsidy or state aid programs because of the requirements of single market customs union membership on the island of Ireland. So either they didn't understand this at the time, or they did understand it at the time but thought they'd somehow be able to finagle their way out of it. Joe Biden understands the Good Friday Agreement, both its importance and its intent, and he becomes relevant here because the plan, as far as I can see, the only plan that's plausible, and Peter Foster of the Financial Times may well poo-poo this when we talk to him in a moment, he understands these issues much better than I do. All I can see as a possible plan would be that they would put the European Union and the Irish government in unison in the position where they were compelled to make the call upon the border in Ireland that becomes inevitable if Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom's trading regime. It can't be simultaneously part of the United Kingdom's trading regime and the European Union's trading regime if the United Kingdom's trading regime is markedly different from the European Union's trading regime. That, to me, is where everything ends up. It was never possible to have regulatory alignment and to, I'll say take advantage, to be kind, to take advantage of leaving the customs union and the single market. As I understand it, that is where everything comes down. And we're still there. So I'll ask you, when you've got a foreign secretary in this country who can't even give a straight answer to the question, should all votes be counted in an election? And you've got a senior advisor to a prime minister in this country who thinks that he can claim he was testing his eyes by going for a 60-mile drive to a local beauty spot on his wife's birthday. I'll ask you whether or not you think they would stoop that low, sort of push the European Union into a position where they would have to be held responsible for doing something that the British government had made inevitable while relying upon the British media either to not understand or to willfully mislead the British people about what was going on. That's my reading of it, and I'm open to yours. So Biden, Brexit, Britain. How do they all play together? And while we're going for the three issues, I see British politics at the moment as, what people call the culture wars, what is a largely laughable term used by racists to make their racism sound somehow more respectable. It's not racism, it's a culture war. It applies in the issue, I think, of transgender, in the sense that the two, quote, sides are so furiously opposed to each other that they never meet in the middle and they're constantly trying to, quote, cancel each other. But in all other areas, religion, race, ethnicity, sexuality, it's nonsense. It's just a phrase that's been drummed up by people who used to talk about political correctness to camouflage the fact that they're just basically racists or white supremacists or whatever you want to call it. And you know, we all know who they are. And That, for me, has three legs, the so-called culture war. It's built on Brexit, it's built on Donald Trump, and it's built on Boris Johnson. It's a stool with three legs. Brexit, Trump, Johnson. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried sitting on a stool after one of those legs has gone. But the culture wars, or the transatlantic, the UK-USA debate, divide, debacle is a stool that until this weekend had three legs, and those three legs were Donald Trump, Boris Johnson and Brexit, and now there's only two legs left. You can do the physics yourself, or you can ask yourself whether or not Joe Biden will be a leg on the same stool. Seems unlikely to me. And if that hasn't bored you to tears, then nothing will. It's 11:11 and Ian's in Leeds. Ian, what would you like to say?
At the moment, right now, yes. I see Joe Biden as, let's say, the captain of a ship, or let's say an oil tanker.
Right.
And the ship, you're on board the ship, and you're confident that you might not get to your destination, but at least you're not going to drown. And
he's not going to blow it up because someone's told him to, or he thinks that's the only way that he'll survive. He's not going to blow up the ship and run for the only lifeboat himself, which I think we could probably all agree Donald Trump would do in a heartbeat.
Exactly, but with Donald Trump as captain, you always had to wear a life.
Well, he was never
jacket.
captain, was he? He was only ever on the end of somebody's string, and we may find out who's in the coming months.
Well, I suppose you could say nominally captain, I suppose.
$400 million in debt, so there's some pretty big strings there.
There you are, but I mean, as far as Brexit's concerned, I mean, I think Biden will probably take a grown-up approach, but I think he'll take a more grown-up approach about many things.
Well, this is the point, isn't it? I love the phrase grown-up. It's the one that popped into my mind while you were talking about ships, because Biden is not going to be able to wave any magic wands or do anything magical but Trump always gave the impression to his supporters that belief would overcome reality. It was, and it's a popular worldview. All cults in history and all totalitarian dictatorships have been built upon the idea that if you just believe enough, then you can defy reality. Biden will deal with reality. Trump dealt with racist fantasy, and that's got to be better for the world. Even if you're a racist fantasist, you don't realise it yet, but your life just got better as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it was a case of with Boris Johnson. I was wondering if it was a case of monkey see, monkey do, in the sense that with Donald Trump, he tore up a number of agreements
and got away with it,
such as walking away from the Paris Climate Agreement. The way he walked away from the Iran nuclear agreement, and so on and so on. And maybe Boris Johnson thought, well, maybe I can get away with that with regards to the EU withdrawal agreement. I can bring international law on that one.
That's a really interesting point, because, whether or not Trump is right when he calls Boris Johnson British Trump, but the idea that Johnson wouldn't have contemplated an act of political vandalism quite as egregious as seeking to break international law in order to break the terms of a treaty that you signed a few months ago, unless he'd watched the contempt with which Donald Trump treated these institutions and conventions. That's a really good point. And you think that one did lead to the other?
I think that, if not directly, then I think that maybe, I think Boris Johnson looked at what Donald Trump was doing and thought, well,
I do now. I do now. I've listened to you, because you see the really extreme examples of people who watched Donald Trump and thought, I'll have a bit of that, like Duterte in the Philippines, Orban in Hungary, and Bolsonaro in Brazil. So although Johnson isn't out and out of that ilk, he would have looked at what Donald Trump was doing to convention, to institution, to tradition, and thought, well, just because no one's ever done this before in the House of Commons, in the UK sovereign parliament, no one's ever actually passed legislation designed to break international law, just because no one else has ever done it doesn't mean I can't. This, remember, is the fellow who prorogued Parliament after getting Jacob Rees-Mogg to mislead the Queen. It's a three-legged stool. This is the metaphor that we're currently running with. And one leg is Boris Johnson, one leg is Brexit, and the other leg was Donald Trump. It's now a two-legged stool, which is rather hard to sit on. Discuss. You do not have to bring the stool into your contributions to the programme. I'm having an eccentric moment, which, frankly, I think I've earned. 19 after 11 is the time. Number you need, 2 phone lines free, 0345 60 973. This from one of my favourite Irish tweeters. It goes by the name of Irish Monk on Twitter. Please make it clear that the EU has no ability nor legality to create nor maintain borders, not in Ireland nor elsewhere. The UK, with its internal markets bill, this is what I was trying to say. I think I did say it quite clearly, but we need even more clarity, and here it is. The internal markets bill may cause an, quote, inadvertent border. This is what I was trying to say. And this presumably was if there was a plan, which is far from certain, this must have been the plan, which would, this inadvertent border caused by the internal markets bill, would force Ireland to have a border, and that would then, in a sense, be a breach. Well, it would leave Ireland accused of breaching the Good Friday Agreement. This is what I think the nefarious plan was. The only law that created a border in Ireland is a British law. So WTO require a border to be managed. UN law requires a border to be managed. Britain can pretend it's not there, but it is there. And if GB isn't careful, it will end up with a Good Friday Agreement referendum being enacted and Irish reunification. And right now, that seems to me to be a very sensible analysis. And once again, I find myself asking you, looking his track record since becoming Prime Minister last year, is there anything you wouldn't put past Boris Johnson? Alan is in, I don't know, Newtown Ards, where's that?
Yeah, Northern Ireland.
Ah, thank you.
First time caller.
You're very welcome. What do you want to say?
Do you? Yeah.
In your own time, mate.
Yeah. I'm trying to... Yeah, no, I think it's going to be a good thing with somebody presidential going into the White House. Donald Trump wasn't presidential.
Can't argue with that. And the impact on Ireland?
I don't think there could be any. I mean, we're going to be inside the European Union, but still in the UK.
Any thoughts on the FA Cup?
No.
Oh, come on.
No, I'm a Liverpool man.
All right. Well, you take care of yourself, Alan. We'll talk again, I'm sure. It's 22 minutes after 11. Greg's in Cork. Greg?
Hi, James. How's it going? Listen, I just want to...
I'm fairly confident that you're going to be the best caller of my last two calls, but I don't want to put any pressure on you there, Greg.
No, just in respect to your comment on the British government, you were surmising of the strategy that the British government might have had. The European Union, and sorry, specifically in relation to the European Union and Dublin having to impose a border on the island of Ireland. The reality is that Britain has responsibilities to what happens here. We've traded with Britain for hundreds of years.
Mate, I'm going to pause you, and you'll come back with all guns blazing, but I'm going to say you have to remember that Britain's responsibilities are currently Boris Johnson's responsibilities, and as far as I'm aware, he's never kept his responsibilities in his life.
That doesn't change the reality. I mean, he's just a man. We're talking about something that is
a man who illegally prorogued Parliament and passed legislation designed to break international law in order to tear up a treaty that he signed 7 months previously. The fella's a one-off, Greg.
That may well be the case, and look, some people may support him. I would say his shortcomings are problems that Britain might need to address, and I know some of the members of the Tory party are growing tired with his strategies, but that's here there. I'm not getting involved in your internal politics. This relates. Maybe I am. But look, the bottom line here, right, is that there was a pathway found for Northern Ireland to continue to be able to work with the Republic of Ireland that preserved Ireland's access to the single market.
Yes.
The Republic of Ireland chooses to remain a member of the European Union.
Yes.
Britain has chosen, as is its right, to exit, and that's fine. But it's like,
yeah, but this article, I think it's Article 10, I should stop saying that in case I've got it wrong, but the bit of the Internal Markets Bill that they say is designed to protect the integrity of the United Kingdom, that is a rock and a hard place, isn't it? If Northern Ireland...
It is a rock and a hard place, but the rock and a hard place have been dealt with in the original withdrawal agreement.
Which they are today... Yeah, well, you know what's happening today in the House of Lords. Yeah, but they want to be able to tear it up.
It had been addressed, and we were going to allow a situation where there'd be a border, let's say, in the Irish Sea, just to make sure that there would be alignment on standards, etc., and to preserve the integrity of the single market for the Republic of Ireland. But in fairness, it left Northern Ireland in a very good position.
Yes.
And many people across both sides of the spectrum in Northern Ireland really do understand, and it's the economy, Stu. They understand the value of the trade with the Republic of Ireland. It is very important to particularly in agriculture, how people in Northern Ireland make money. There is trade and there's processing done on both sides of the border. That must continue, and the imposition of a border between Northern Ireland and the Republic is going to foment all of that unrest that we finally put behind us, and nobody ever wants to go back there.
No,
but
so what happens
then? Disingenuous when he suggests that the Internal Markets Bill does not threaten peace in this island. It is a egregious attack on the Good Friday Agreement is what it is, and they're trying to put the ball back in the courts of Dublin and Brussels.
Yes.
As if we've caused this problem. We haven't. Let's remember, he who dips his wick must pay for the oil, and the reality is that Brexit, sorry for that crass terminology, but I'm trying to bring people on a journey here. Britain did get involved in affairs of Ireland back in the day, it has carried through over the ages, and we are now in a situation where, Britain is choosing to leave. That's fine, but it is leaving a bit of a mess behind, and it needs to be resolved.
And so the idea that they are forcing the hand of Dublin or in hand with the European Union, that if there is any plan at all, that must be what the plan is. Was.
Look, you can't square this circle.
Well, you couldn't square it in 2016, could you?
Well, there was something of a fudge done here in the plan to put the border down the island of Ireland.
Yes.
Down the Irish Sea, and to allow Northern Ireland.
But then Johnson kept denying that was going to happen, even as it was the only fudge available. He was ensuring business people in Northern Ireland. Admittedly, he looked like he'd had a drink in the footage that I saw, but nonetheless, he swore blind there wouldn't be anything. There'd be no paperwork. There'd be no checks. It was all nonsense. And here we are.
The media coverage in Ireland on Brexit and its impact has been much, much more clear than the coverage in Britain throughout the entire Brexit.
Sainthood for Fintan O'Toole, Greg. That's what we need.
No, not just Fintan O'Toole.
No, Tony Connolly, all of RTE. You've been. Where do you think I get my facts from? I don't get them from British newspapers, that's for sure. Although, of course, there are some exceptions. And it was that book I quoted a moment ago, Lionel Barber's. Here's one of the power lines in it. When Cummings came to the Financial Times for lunch in 2016, in the middle of the campaign, and said to the then editor of the Financial Times, Cummings says he has no idea what damage such a shock might do. The figure is unknowable. This is the question about economic damage. The figure is unknowable, and the ordinary person in the street would have little understanding anyway. As he realises what he has said, Cummings adds, this conversation is off the record, right? It's never retrospectively off the record, by the way, but obviously Don probably needed his eyes tested that day. So that is one of the things I was referring to when I asked you just how much contempt do you think Johnson and Cummings hold the British people in? And there is your answer. The figure is unknowable, and the ordinary person in the street would have little understanding anyway. So the question of why they wanted to do it, of course, remains unanswered. And Greg there, being very unfair to our Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, who at least when he's asked a straight question like, should you count all the votes in an election, is capable of giving a straight answer.
Do you think that all votes should be counted in a democratic election?
Look, I'm not going to get drawn into opining on what is a different system in the US. What I can say, and I said from the outset...
Hang on, sorry. The question is, do you think all votes should be counted in a democratic election? I find it astonishing there's not an answer to that.
Well, because what you're going to... If I say yes and there's an appeal that goes one way, I mean, we know, for example, there's going to be recounts. Okay, we know that in relation to some of the state seats, we know in relation to some of the Senate seats, but we can also say that the result is clear now, and I don't think that's preempting those other processes, which is exactly why I said we should tread sensitively to respect the integrity of the process.
Should we count all the elections, all the votes in an election? Oh, I'm Dominic Raab. I can't even say yes to that. Unbelievable. Do you remember the little bunch of clips we put together during the Conservative leadership campaign? It popped up again at the weekend. You retweeted it yourself, you big Jessie. Yeah, all right. I retweeted it myself at the weekend. 5.5 million views it's had. I think it might be time for a sequel. It's coming up to 11:30. After the headlines with Simon Conway in just a moment's time, we'll catch up with Peter Foster of the Financial Times, formerly of the Telegraph, and on both newspapers he's provided some of the clearest and best informed coverage of Brexit-related shenanigans, so we will benefit from his insights in a moment. And I must show you the televangelist Kenneth Copeland's response to the news that Joe Biden had won the American election and would become president. If you remember the lady last week who was talking in tongues, I think it's fair to say this works as a perfect companion piece. This is an interesting one as well from Richard Akins, a former Lord Justice of Appeal, and someone who supported and I think still supports Brexit. He describes himself as a self-confessed Brexiteer. The writer must express astonishment at this attempt to trample on fundamental principles of the rule of law. And that is obviously what the Internal Markets Bill was designed to do. The question really is whether or not the Tory MPs who voted for it were bright enough to understand what they were voting for. And looking at some of their responses to the Marcus Rashford U-turn this weekend, I don't think they were. I genuinely don't. It pains me to say this. It doesn't really, but it does a bit. John Cleese was very strong on this at the weekend about being too stupid to realise just how stupid you are. Big fan of John Cleese, although obviously I don't agree with him about everything. I think this is a much bigger problem in British politics now than we realise. Because if you had been sent out by Boris Johnson to essentially cover yourself in tar and feathers in front of your constituents while defending the decision not to feed the hungriest children in the country during the school holidays, most recently half-term, of course. So some of these people were disgusting. They didn't just go along with it. You had one woman, what was her name? Saxby, Selene Saxby or something like that, writing a Facebook post about how all the businesses that were offering to help hungry children could go whistle if they wanted support from the government in the event of another lockdown or a sort of furlough type scheme. Breathtaking. That lad in Mansfield, who is performance art as politics, sort of wanging on about people who use their packed lunches to buy crack cocaine or something or go into brothels. So these people didn't just embarrass themselves. I hate to say it, but they defecated in their hands and started clapping because Boris Johnson told them to. And then he did a U-turn. So the question of whether or not they're intelligent enough to realise just how comprehensively they've been shafted by their own party leader, I don't think they are. Genuinely, I don't. It's almost psychological. You heard it there with Rob. Just this inability to recognise the most simple of realities. Do you think all votes should be counted in an election? Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom. Well, and if you listen to the rest of that superlative piece of interviewing by Sophie Ridge at Sky News, you'd have heard him try to justify his failure to answer the first question by describing what he considered was likely to be the second question. So he sort of said at one point, and this, of course, was the man that didn't discover the importance of the Dover to Calais crossing to British trade with the continental Europe until he actually became Secretary of State for Brexit. Man alive. Anyway, it's like a Pandora's box sometimes, isn't it? Dominic Raab's box. You open it, and all of this stuff just comes rushing out, most of which you'd forgotten. So, there it is. He wasn't even going to answer that question. So, as the patron saint of people not bright enough to realise how stupid they are, I give you the Foreign Secretary. But the question now, on whether or not they realise what they were voting for when the Internal Markets Bill went through with a big whipped majority, do they realise? Do they realise what they were voting for? I don't think they did. I think they just did what they were told. It's complicated, and we'll be talking to Peter Foster about it now. Peter, I forgot you were there, mate. Forgive me for going off on a bit of a tangent. I do apologise. No one should have that inflicted upon them unprompted. Could you talk us through, if you don't mind, where we are and where you think we're likely to be by the end of next week?
For the whole Brexit bill or the UK internal market?
Specifically on the Internal Markets Bill today in the Lords, and what that interplay between the troubling clauses of the Internal Markets Bill and the Good Friday Agreement will mean.
So it looks very clear that the Lords will strike out the offending clauses, as you might call them, of the UK Internal Market Bill, which you will remember disapplied parts of the agreement that we ratified back in January, specifically the bits that covered the state aid rules that cover goods in Northern Ireland, and also the fact that Northern Ireland, under the terms of the agreement, would have to do these bits of paperwork for sending goods from Northern Ireland into Great Britain. So those were two things we agreed to, and that they were disapplied by this bill if it goes through. Now, the Lords are going to chuck it out because, as Brandon Lewis said, this would be in breach of international law. But number 10 is pretty clear that it's going to put them back in, is what it said this morning. And we have to wait and see, probably December time, whether or not they indeed do that, by which time we may or may not have a Brexit deal that may or may not obviate the need for those clauses. So that's the kind of the little dance that's going on here. Because if you get a zero tariff, zero quota Brexit deal that addresses some of these issues, then you might be able to let those clauses lapse. But I have to tell you, James, that, these are quite talismanic, these clauses, I think, for the really hardcore sovereigntist Brexiteers. They felt that the Northern Irish Protocol, which you remember left Northern Ireland in the kind of following the EU's rules for goods, essentially, left Northern Ireland as an orbit of the European Union. they really feel that does cut across UK sovereignty, and they feel these
they're
clauses,
right, actually, aren't they?
Well,
really?
they are. They absolutely are. But it is what they signed, and I think they feel that these clauses are really necessary to protect UK sovereignty. They're not ripping up the Good Friday Agreement. They're not ripping up the agreement, but they're circumscribing it in a way that is unilateral. They're basically saying, if we don't like the way you handle it, this is what we're going to do. And that, of course, is in breach of what they agreed last year, the oven-ready deal.
And once again, I think it all boils down to the impossibility, however hard one might believe or however tightly one might cross one's fingers. You cannot have a functioning Good Friday Agreement, as it is understood by everybody, and two different trading regimes on the island of Ireland, and yet that appears to be the area of denial still after 4 years.
No, and people who follow this for ages will know that for years and years we had this discussion about how you can do that. Now, this deal.
This is for people who perhaps are lucky enough to have forgotten. This is when we were hearing a lot about unicorns or technological solutions, and people like Rees-Mogg and Owen Paterson would queue up to claim the solution was really, really easy. They just couldn't tell us what it was yet.
Exactly. So the question is going to be, if we end up in a no-deal world and the UK is running this border in the Irish Sea on its own terms, essentially, the UK government will always say, we're not going to put a border back in Ireland. So the question is, if the UK runs this border in the Irish Sea, so all of the goods going from Great Britain into Northern Ireland, as you say, in order for there to be no border in Ireland, north-south, they need to be compliant with all of the same rules. Now, if the UK runs that border in a way that is too porous for the EU, do you get yourself in a situation where Brussels is pressuring Dublin to start putting some kind of checks back on that border because they're worried about the integrity of the single market? So the UK would never put a border back. But if you get into that world, then I think you get into a really messy business. Now, I'm not saying that's where we would get to, because I think this government does understand that would be a real red line in Joe Biden's Washington. It would be a real red line in Brussels. So, I don't think any of us quite know how a no deal would plan out, but they are, the kindest way you could say it, James, I think, is they are really playing with fire here.
And how hotter, I'm going to stretch your metaphor to breaking point now, how much hotter does that fire become with the change of personnel in the White House?
Well, a lot, So you hear the government saying, listen, these clauses are designed to defend the Good Friday Agreement because they protect the fact that you need to have unfettered trade between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. So if you're crudely, if you're a unionist in Northern Ireland, then part of the Good Friday Agreement is that you're also still part of the UK. So you can't have Brexit erecting a border in the Irish Sea. But of course, this is why Theresa May said she would never, no British Prime Minister would ever sign this deal. Precisely. Johnson did sign a deal that essentially put Northern Ireland in special status. And what we're really talking about is, can you finesse that? Can you manage that so no one's noses on either side of the Irish divide gets rubbed in it? And the UK feels that the European Union's being too legalistic. It's been asking too many demands of the UK on that border in the Irish Sea. But, it is what Boris signed up to. And that it's not respecting the fact that it needs to look both ways, both from Northern Ireland to Great Britain and the other direction, to look after the needs of both communities. But as you know, James, you followed this for years, this was a kind of trilemma. Do you remember the Irish trilemma that ultimately doesn't really have a solution if the UK is determined to leave the customs union single market? As you say, two separate trade regimes, and we're still stuck on this rock.
It's incredible. Someone's just sent me a front page of the Guardian newspaper from October of 2016, right? And it's got two stories on the front page. The splash is UK seeks to move border into Ireland, and the second lead on the front page is Trump hits out at Republican hypocrites. So the Irish border and Trump's victimhood, still 4 years later, they could be on the front page again, albeit with slightly different syntax. I hesitate to ask you such a shallow question, but what do you think? I mean, is there going to be a free trade agreement that would temporarily postpone some of the problems we've described but not solve them? Because I've given up now. I might as well toss a coin. Sadly, I think Boris Johnson might end up tossing a coin as well.
Yes,
Listen to that sigh. That sigh has got 4 years of provenance and vintage behind it.
Listen, I think that Boris Johnson is in a rock and a hard place right now, because in order to prioritise sovereignty over economics, essentially, the deal that he's negotiated is quite a thin deal. If you listen to the logistics groups, the trade groups, etc., this deal comes with 270 million new customs declarations a year. This is not a deal where we can all go back to bed. This is a deal that takes us back to 1992. And so, Johnson does this deal, and remember, in order to do the deal, Michel Barnier just saying today, he's going to have quite strong strings attached to it, which will cut across UK sovereignty. He's then going to have to own a deal that is essentially going to be full of friction for not much benefit, not much market access. And the alternative, James, if he doesn't do the deal, is really to say, actually, why go all this way and then do a deal which essentially leaves us trapped in the regulatory orbit of Brussels? So if Johnson was minded to do a no deal, he would basically be saying, look, if we're going to do Brexit, we might as well do it properly, go fully independent. Of course, he then opens a Pandora's box on the Irish border. He opens a Pandora's box with Washington. If you ask me to bet, James, I'd say he does a deal, but I can absolutely see how you construct an argument for no deal from a purely political perspective. Because
would I be right, Peter Foster, in thinking that you're roughly 52-48 on this?
Listen, but decision time is coming. I know we always say these deadlines come and go, but I really do think in the next couple of weeks, Boris Johnson is going to have to decide whether he's prepared to accept the EU's demand for sort of strings attached, or whether we can find some compromise around that, or whether he just goes, look, the price for this very skinny deal is really too high. And at that point, both sides have to, because there's a hit to competence. But then, the argument that is 2024, when the next election comes up, are people going to remember whether the queue of trucks at Dover was 2 miles or 5 miles? Yeah. But will they remember Boris sold us out? Boris didn't stand his ground against Brussels. That's the kind of bigger political calculation for him.
Fascinating as ever. Just one thing, if I may, Peter. It's not between a rock and a hard place anymore. It's between a crematorium and a pawn shop. Peter Foster, public policy editor at the Financial Times, and I cannot recommend either his Twitter feed or his weekly Brexit briefing in the FT highly enough. Many thanks, as always. It's 11:47. I can't imagine you thank me for it at the moment, but at least no one who listens to this programme on a regular basis will have been surprised by any of the events of recent weeks, particularly those regarding Brexit. But as Peter Foster just explained, I felt in creditably clear terms, whatever happens is going to be bad, and that's been the problem since the result came in. Nothing available was better than what we already had. So Johnson's decision, I leave it to you to decide what you think he'll base his decision on. His own political reputation, his own political future, or the good of the country. Yeah. See, something else he has in common with Donald Trump. Sammy is in Barnet. If you can remember why you rang in, Sammy, it was quite a while ago, but you can steer me back to the Biden conversation, I think. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I was just listening to you for the past 45 minutes or hour or so, and I'm just quite shocked, to be honest, like some of the comments that are coming out about racist fantasy and about not presidential, when we have a guy
Have you been triggered?
Forging peace. Well, yeah, we've got a guy who's forging peace in the Middle East. We've got a guy who's forming trade deals. You've got the USMCA. He's negotiating with NATO countries to up their payments. This is a guy who's forging peace. He's
gone, and we're talking about Joe Biden, Sammy. So my condolences. What do you think about the new fella?
Oh, he's awful. He's a racist. What do you want me to say? This is a guy who co-authored the 1994 crime bill.
Something sensible in the context of Brexit.
No, but I'm talking about the comments that were made.
Well, you just said, what do you want me to say? And I said something sensible in the context of Brexit would be good.
Okay, well, I'll say something sensible. Trump hasn't gone yet.
Okay.
I don't understand how we're allowing comments like racist fantasy when we have a guy who co-authored the 1994 crime bill.
Well, Alex, okay, Sammy, listen.
The Supreme Court said.
No, I hear you, my friend, and I wish you all the very best. But if you don't understand why we would talk about Donald Trump in the context of racism, then I can't help you, I'm afraid. That's a mountain far too steep for me, but you take care. George is in London. George, what would you like to say?
Hello, I'd just like to say that with Biden and with Brexit, in many ways it's actually the same story. Both the United States and the United Kingdom use the first-past-the-post electoral system that just split people into two artificial camps.
I don't know if Brexit was an artificial camp, was it?
Well, in many ways it was, because it was just the question of like, oh, do you want to be rich or do you want to be free? That was the way it was often framed.
But being rich, what I mean by that is you vote in a first-past-the-post system for a politician, you know roughly what you're going to get, or at least they tell you roughly what they're going to get, and they can be held more or less to account for what promises they made and what pledges have been broken. Brexit was, for me at least, and I'll give you time to explain yourself because I may have misunderstood you. For me at least, Brexit was a complete a pie in the sky fantasy. I mean, you got that quote I read you a moment ago from Dominic Cummings, essentially saying our British people won't even understand what's going on. So, you know, let's crack on. I don't see the parallels. I appreciate, for the record, you don't like first past the post electoral systems. That's fine, but Brexit and an American presidential election being the same, I don't quite see it.
Well, because in many ways they're the same culture war. Because you've got a system that goes, okay, either you're in the red team or the blue team.
Yes.
You're in whichever it is.
Oh, I see what
and
I think.
In many ways, it's almost like a coincidence where they just go, oh, and this time on the agenda is Brexit. And the blue team says they all love it. And, a third of the country is going to go with it, no matter how crazy or stupid or damaging Brexit becomes. Because they'll always vote for the Conservative politicians who support Brexit. And then another third will always go, it's terrible, it's evil, it's bad. They'll always support the red team, which...
do you think that's going to change? Because, listen, whether it was the right way to behave or not, everyone has been defined by Trump for the last 4 years in discussing America, either resisting his fascistic program or his sort of appalling racism, or promoting it or excusing it. There's nothing ever really been about anything else, and that just doesn't hold true anymore. So with Joe Biden in charge, perhaps we start talking about detail and policy rather than bigotry and personality.
And hopefully that's what happens. But
so what do the other lot do then? This is the question then, isn't it? What do the last caller possibly was an example. I mean, apart from gibberish or desperately trying to keep these old fights alive, or holding up in the White House pretending that I mean, for me, George, when he had supporters in Arizona saying carry on counting, and reporters in Pennsylvania saying stop counting, or possibly the other way around, it doesn't matter. That was the apotheosis of everything for me. That was the point at which he realised how completely he'd destroyed objective truth. Supporters of the same person calling simultaneously for polar opposite platforms, one shouting for voting to stop, counting to stop, and one shouting for counting to continue. Where do they go now?
Where do they go? Probably they're going to end up in some crazy land that will probably elect in 4 years' time another crazy... Well,
because if those fires keep burning, and Trump is clearly going to do his best to keep them burning, I've heard reports that he's going to go on rallies, and no doubt there'll be some fundraising involved. The small print of some of the fundraising emails going out this weekend revealed that 60% of donations would go on paying off the debts they've already got. And that's the campaign. The man, Trump's in the hole for about $400 million. And that's before we've even seen his tax returns. But, so much winning. And finally, Jonathan is in Toulouse. Jonathan, what would you like to say?
Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, I was hoping to sound you out on my idea. I thought about this soon after the referendum, in fact.
Go on.
Possibly for the border question,
yes.
Negotiating with the French to stick the border controls in France, in the Channel ports, on north of France.
Well, why would they want that? They wouldn't want a massive great car park.
You'd have to negotiate.
They don't want the Farage garages any more than Ken does.
It's better than what we've got now, I think.
Better for us it is. It's not very good for our French friends. You're in Toulouse.
It would have had to be negotiated.
I see.
4 years, I think we could have done something.
Maybe, or at least we could have come to some sort of compromise.
Exactly.
But that would have involved communication, union, and recognition of the facts. So that ship has sailed. That ferry has sailed.
But I'm surprised that nobody's taken it up.
No, well, I mean, I don't know that. I'm not surprised, Jonathan, if I've understood you correctly, that the reason is that this has been an exercise in reality denial at worst and reality postponement at best for the last 4 years. And when it has happened, when we're into next year, then I think there'll be years in which plans and proposals such as yours will be considered and maybe put in place, because then we will be retrospectively engineering reality as opposed to proactively denying it, which has been the direction of traffic for the last 4 years. That's what I think anyway. Let me now tell you what the well-known American televangelist Kenneth Copeland made of the announcement that Joe Biden had won the election. And if you heard last week's spiritual advisor to the president speaking in tongues on this programme, I think you'll agree that this is a rather charming companion piece.
The media said what? The media said Joe Biden's president. Ha 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 ha.
I'm going to completely change course now, so my apologies to Phil and Victoria and Mohammed and Tony and Lloyd and another Tony, two Tonys. You wait all your life for one Tony and then two come along at once. We are going to start talking about NHS workers because we have to, but I'm conscious that we will want to pick over the bones of the American election, particularly as Donald Trump continues to deny reality. Something else he has in common with Brexiters in the coming days, so be prepared for that. I would love to speak to, and I know I'm not going to be able to, this is me dreaming out loud, there's no even vague hope of this happening, but if you worked at the Four Seasons landscaping, what was give it its full title, and the phone call came through, Four Seasons Total Landscaping, and the phone call came through from somebody close to Rudy Giuliani, maybe even someone in the White House, I don't know how it works, and said, we'd like to book your premises for a press conference with Donald Trump's lawyer. And the person didn't say, you do realise we're a landscaping company. They just said, yeah, that'll be fine. What time would you like to arrive? And that moment there seems to me to be one of the moments of purest comedy in all of our lives. Not just because they got the Four Seasons Hotel mixed up with the Four Seasons Total Landscaping, but because Four Seasons Total Landscaping really is situated between a pawn shop and a crematorium. There's a slightly fruitier phrase that I can use on Twitter, but I'm not going to use it on the radio because you might have the kids in the car or something like that, and I don't want you to have to explain to them what it is, although obviously I couldn't fight shy of using a more palatable descriptive term, so apologies if you've been asked any uncomfortable questions as a result of that. But could you imagine? So what do you think happened? Do you think they knew what they were doing? Or do you think it was just it could have been just a job's worthlessness? Yeah, well, that sounds a bit odd, but hey, business is business. Come one, come all. Or did they realise that the person on the other end of the phone had made a mistake? See, they could be either absolute Trump loyalists or absolute anti-Trumpists, couldn't they? So if you were an absolute Trump loyalist, you just think, hell yeah, bring them in. And if you were anti-Trump, you'd think, let's not tell them that we're not a hotel. So Rudy Giuliani ends up standing in front of a garage door covered in small, I mean, they couldn't even cover the whole door. That's the most magnificent thing about the pictures. So he's got a lectern in front of him, a sort of wooden lectern with a Trump red sticker on it, and then behind him you've got the blue and red ones, like a checkerboard, but they didn't have enough to cover, it'd be a platform. It's a bit like when I was broadcasting from the shed, and we had the big LBC branding behind me when I was in the shed during lockdown. Now, because the camera never panned out, as the technical types say, because the camera never pulled out for a bigger shot, what you couldn't see was that the branding behind me, the LBC branding behind me, didn't fill the wall. So, you know, you'd have seen the corner of a picture of the kids on one side, and there was an old guitar case on the other side, and then up the top, if the camera had pulled out, and above there's a shelf that's got all sorts of nonsense on it. Like, so I'm such a modest person, it's got my awards on it, if I'm honest. It's a sort of out of sight, out of mind place and the kids' sports day trophies and stuff like that. So if the camera had pulled out when I was broadcasting from the shed, you'd have seen all manner of detritus around the edges of the screen. And that's what you see here. It's a garage door, like an old-fashioned 1970s garage door. I don't know why I said 1970s. I'll tell you why I said 1970s. It's like the garage door we had in the 1970s, but there's nothing else that makes that garage door or that type of garage door particularly linked to the 1970s. So had the camera pulled out, you'd have... And then all the people behind him, I mean, they were sort of dressed in cagoules. There's a couple of people in suit. There was no rhyme nor reason to it at all. And somebody took the call. Hello, Four Seasons Total Landscaping. Well, hi there. I represent Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York and lawyer to President Donald Trump, and we'd like to book your facilities to have a press conference. It's going to be the greatest press... And the person from Four Seasons Total Landscaping just didn't say, let me pause you right there, sir, madam. Let me just pause you right there. You do realise we're a landscaping company, not a five-star hotel with conference facilities. And they didn't do that. So they announced it, and then they had to announce a little later, it's not at the hotel, it's at the... And a couple of... The Philadelphia Inquirer and the Washington Post have done bang-up jobs on how this happened. But to the best of my knowledge, and I didn't finish the Philadelphia Inquirer piece before coming on air this morning, to the best of my knowledge, they haven't found the moment. They haven't found the pivot. During Watergate, they were known as Deep Throat. During this saga, well, you'd have to probably go next door, not to the crematorium. During this saga, I don't know what you'd call... What would you call the person from Four Seasons Total Landscaping who didn't tell Giuliani's people that they were a landscaping firm as opposed to a five-star hotel with conference facilities, which left him standing in front of a garage door which they didn't even have enough posters to cover? Happy days. And that was a moment, wasn't it? And this is how Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York City who got into trouble with Borat, of course, recently, giving a news conference in a car park in Philadelphia, disputing the legitimacy of the US presidential election. And while he's speaking, all the major networks called it for Joe Biden. So he's, I mean, you wouldn't, if Armando Iannucci had written this, if you're listening, Armando, then perhaps you could confirm or deny what I'm about to say. If Armando Iannucci had written this, he'd have sent it back. He'd have gone back to the drawing board. He'd said, I can't. He said, it's brilliant. For Veep, for example, they'd have gone, we just can't. We can't. I mean, look, that works. We can just about get away with that. But that and that and that and this, no. That's stretching the bounds of plausibility too far. Look, we can just about get away with them getting a five-star hotel mixed up with a landscaping company. And because of that, it can look really ramshackle when they get there, because they were expecting to be at the Four Seasons Hotel, not the Four Seasons Total Landscaping. So the garage door, all that kind of thing. But him actually being in the middle of a spiel when someone in the audience shouts out that all the networks have just called it for Joe Biden, that is... Well, I don't know. That's why I'm not a comedy scriptwriter. Not intentionally, anyway. This is that moment.
They don't decide the election. The call for Joe Biden is it? Who was it called by? Oh my goodness, all the networks. Wow. All the networks. We have to forget about the law. Judges don't count. All the networks. All the networks thought Biden was going to win by 10%. Gee, what happened? Come on, don't be ridiculous. Networks don't get to decide elections. Courts do.
There's something amazing about hearing James lampoon the Four Seasons phone call with all the characters sounding like they're from Hanna-Barbera cartoons. Do you know, I'm turning into Ronnie Corbett this morning. Do you know, I met Joseph Barbera once in California before he died many years ago. I must tell you that story sometime. I really did. It was one of those surreal... Anyway, it's a story for another day. Do you know what my reaction to... My reaction to Rudy Giuliani giving a speech in the car park of a landscaping firm was at the time? It was a bit like Kenneth Copeland's reaction to Joe Biden winning.
The media said what? The media said Joe Biden's president. Ha 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 ha.
And that that continues still. Actually, hasn't stopped. He's still. He's one of the guys on American TV claiming to be a Christian and asking you to send in your money to, help him with his. Stop it now. Stop it. Oh Lord. Oh, literally.
That'll be right then.